Yeah, and the irony of basically censoring RT and Sputnik News, friends of ours are on those channels, and a great archive of material has been deleted, literally deleted from YouTube. The great irony of all of this is that going back to that vote that the Russian Federation put in front of the United Nations to condemn the glorification of Nazism, the United States' justification for voting against that resolution was in the name of free speech. The irony of it is just, I mean, just when you brought that up, and to bring up other kind of resolutions in the United Nations as sort of a temperature gauge of where we're at in the world, I think it's also important to point out that there were 35 abstentions in the recent vote to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with 141 votes condemning. And while that might seem kind of like a disproportionate, number where you have 141, voting in favor of the U.S. led condemnation of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and 35 abstentions, those 35 abstentions represent about half the world's population. And some, are making the argument that we might be, witnessing the kind of seeds of a new non-aligned movement, where you can't really fully side on one side or the other for a variety of reasons. But I wanted to hear what your thoughts are on that particular kind of vote, and how some of the most populous and largest countries in the world, such as China and Brazil and others, are refusing to participate in Western sanctions against the Russian Federation, and really what that means, for an alternative project to U.S. imperialism.
Well, two things, Nick, I want to say about that. One is that, I'm against this war, okay? There's a kind of a weird way in which one has to say that, but I'm against this war. I think wars are horrible. I've reported from wars, there's nothing is barbaric, you can't have there's no such thing as bombing from the sky and being precise. No such thing. I've seen that in Israel. Israel's bombing of Gaza, there's no precision. They wipe out entire families. They attack a street and just take everybody out. So, I mean, this is an ugly situation. Now, why are these countries not openly coming out and voting in the UN against Russia? Why? Because they recognize there's a difference between the war, which people want to come to an end, ceasefire, negotiations, and so on, and sanctions. Sanctions are permanent. Once you start getting down the sanctions road, it's really hard to withdraw sanctions. We've seen that. The United States believes that somehow sanctions are a peaceful way to pressure countries. They are not. They become permanent, and they are super harsh against social life. These countries simply don't want to enter a world where you're going to have an economic iron curtain between those countries and these countries and so on. It's the United States that's actually putting an economic iron curtain around Russia and China. Most countries don't want that. You think Argentina, which just signed up to the Belt and Road, the Chinese, their project, do you think Argentina wants to pick between the US and China? No, why should they pick? Let countries develop their own assessment of where they're going to get investment and so on. Energy resources, why should India have to decide we're no longer going to deal with Russia? Why? Let India decide on that. Now, that doesn't mean India is pro-war. India will say, let's not have the war, but we want to continue to trade. So this yoking of the war or a ceasefire negotiation and so on, and sanctions, that's being imposed by the West. The other countries don't see these as the same. They would also like the war to end, but they don't want sanctions. So I think that's one, we got to have a little nuance here. India doesn't want sanctions, but India also wants the war to end. It's not cheerleading for the Russian war. Now, this thing about this vote in the UN, look, it's so interesting how the information war happens, okay? United States has put out the view that Iran is a belligerent country which wants to basically destroy the whole world with its nuclear weapons. Okay, the so-called mad mullah and all that stuff. Okay, but let's look at the evidence. Iran, most of the Arab governments have every year said they want a Middle East nuclear-free zone. they want to have no nuclear weapons in the Middle East. The two parties that oppose the Iranian and Arab state proposal for a nuclear free zone, Middle East nuclear free zone, the two that are against it, one is the United States, which doesn't want this because the US has naval bases across the Gulf where they have nuclear weapons. So, in fact, in the naval base in Bahrain, naval base in Qatar, they have nuclear weapons in their ships and so on. So they don't want a nuclear free. Okay, who's the other country that doesn't want a Middle East nuclear free zone? It's Israel. Israel does not want a nuclear free zone because they have nuclear weapons, which they don't openly declare, but they have them. Iran is in favor of a Middle East nuclear free zone, and yet the way the information war works, Iran is the mad country that wants to destroy the world. Now tell me, you can have the evidence on a plate. In 2015, at the Nuclear Review Conference, Iran and the Arab states put it on the table. Do you know who was the president in 2015? US president? Wasn't Donald Trump, it was Barack Obama. Barack Obama pushed back and suffocated the Iranian proposal to have a Middle East nuclear free weapon zone. Now that's nuts, man. You sometimes feel, when you dig into the evidence like that, you feel like you're going crazy. Like, how is it possible that here you have Iranians, and I'm not keen on a theocratic state or anything, but here's Iranians with a proposal in their hands saying, hey, listen, we are eager to have no nuclear weapons in the Middle East. It's the United States and Israel saying, no, we don't want the nuclear, and yet it's Iran that looks nuts in the media. Same way here, it doesn't matter actually what the facts are. What are the facts? There has been grievances of not only Russians, and I don't know why this other stuff hasn't come out. In the Hungarian parliament in the last 5 years, there have been discussions about Ukraine's anti-minority policies where Hungarian speakers have felt prejudiced against. There have been discussions in the World Roma Congress because there's a Roma population in Western Ukraine. There have been discussions there about how the government of Petro Poroshenko was driving. But suddenly all of that, where is that discussion? It's not about Russian speakers alone. We are focusing on the Donbass and so on. But actually Poroshenko's policy goes against and Nick, you like this, it goes against the plurinational character of the Ukrainian state. And where is that conversation? That cannot be allowed. This is a conversation, as Biden said, between democracy and autarky. Autocracy on one side, authoritarianism, democracy on the other. As they are talking about democracy in Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky is banning left-wing political parties. But let's leave that aside. But this is not about democracy and autocracy. This is a question of what should be the character of the Ukrainian state. Now, I agree. You should not go to war to establish plurinationalism. If that's the standard, then somebody needs to attack India, where the government is going in the exact opposite direction of plurinationalism. I'm not saying you have a war to impose plurinational. I'm talking about how things are perceived. And that's why I feel in the whole hybrid war context or that discussion, the information war is a key area. And it's not for us to be information warriors on behalf of this or that government. We are critics of how the world is appearing. I'm not carrying a bucket of vodka for the Russian government into some information battle. I'm not keen on people who do things like that. I'm interested in saying, listen, people, let's derive our understanding of the world from the facts, not from a bloody illusion. You go from rooting for Putin to Putin is an autocrat or madman or whatever it is. That's their world. When is Thomas Friedman, I don't know why I'm picking on him, but when is Thomas Friedman going to come out and account for the fact that he said those things about Mr. Putin? I've written about the Russians for a long time. I never call Mr. Putin anything other than somebody who is a very close associate of the billionaire class in Russia and somebody who was handpicked by Boris Yeltsin, a stooge of the United States, to become his heir apparent because And Putin did this. As soon as Mr. Yeltsin left office, Putin basically immunized him from prosecution. That's how I've understood Mr. Putin. It's a pretty rational, straightforward understanding. I don't think he's a good or bad guy. I just think he's a product of his time. But these people, on the one side, they say you're a great hero. Next day, they say you're an animal. I mean, what kind of thinking is this? How can anybody take them seriously? But
Well, to be fair, Vijay, when you want to investigate the successes of a poverty alleviation program in China, then you become an apologist for totalitarianism.
well, isn't that interesting? I mean, that's super interesting. The